Hello, my name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions.
And I'm Proven Paradox, a guy with a lot of questions.
And you're listening to Bright on Buddhism, a podcast where we discuss East Asian Buddhism, answering listener-submitted questions from listeners just like you, and introducing concepts of Buddhism that you may or may not be familiar with in a casual, conversational setting. Enjoy. Hermit. Should highly advanced spiritual leaders also occupy powerful political positions?
In many ways, I think an advanced spiritual leader already occupies a powerful political position. What do you think?
I agree. In general, I don't think that should be the case, but it's easy to see how and why it is so. The two domains of power are incredibly similar. They both purport to exert power and control over the realm of human beings. Religious power determines the position of the world in the cosmic sense, and political power does so in the material sense. Both the cosmic and the material go hand in hand. It makes perfect sense that both domains have historically been understood to be one and the same.
That is certainly an interesting way to think about it. In the present, many believe the two domains of power should be separated, with an insurmountable barrier between them, and I tend to agree, at least in the ideal sense. You're right that they are inexorably linked, but no one person should have that much power and influence over that many people.
I agree. I think that it leads to dangerous outcomes, such as attempts to legislate morality, regulate religious identity, and turn political and religious institutions into houses of profit and exploitation. However, it's fascinating to see people who continue to occupy those positions due to long history and tradition. Because much of their power in both domains has been taken away, they function as living museum artifacts. They should never have real power, nor should they exist as a result of exploitation of the commonry, but traditions teach us a great deal about history and about ourselves.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Bright on Buddhism. This week, we will be discussing the Dalai Lama. What is a Dalai Lama? What is the meaning and significance of that position? Who is the Dalai Lama today? We hope you enjoy. So let's get into it. What is a Dalai Lama?
I think this is a good question because the Dalai Lama has become the face of Buddhism in the West, and many think of him as the Pope of Buddhism. Indeed, he often represents Buddhism at religious and spiritual summits and gatherings with a bunch of other religious leaders. First, I want to say that the Dalai Lama is not the Pope of Buddhism. He only represents leadership of a portion of Buddhists, mainly Tibetan and Western Buddhists. That means that most Chinese, Indian, Southeast Asian, Korean, and Japanese Buddhists respect him as somebody who is very advanced on the path, but do not hold him as the highest authority of their own lineages. He's a part of an ecumenical structure that is specific to the Tibetan Gelug school of Buddhism, as we'll discuss. First, we'll discuss the history of the position, and then we'll discuss the relationship to the Tibetan people and nation. Finally, we'll talk about the present-day 14th Dalai Lama and how he came into the position. The Dalai Lama is a title given in the 16th century to a guy named Sonam Gyatso, who lived from 1543 to 1588. He received this title from the Khan of the Tumed Mongols, Altan Khan, who was one of his students. The Dalai portion of the title is a Mongolian translation of the Tibetan word for Great Ocean, and Lama is an honorific title given to religious teachers and monastics. While he was the first to have the title in his lifetime, Sonam Gyatso and his followers actually gave the title posthumously to two earlier figures. The first Dalai Lama, Gendon Drup, who lived from 1391 to 1474, was a student of the great scholar Je Tsongkhapa, who lived from 1357 to 1419. Je Tsongkhapa was a very important thinker and a founding figure in Gelug Buddhism. The second Dalai Lama was Gendun Gyatso, who lived from 1476 to 1542. He was pretty uneventful as a Dalai Lama, but he was regarded as a reincarnation of both Gendun Drupa and Je Tsongkhapa. In the end, this all means that Sonam Gyatso was the first living person in history to hold the title, but the third person to be regarded as the Dalai Lama. When this title of Dalai Lama started being used, the Gelug school of Buddhism was still relatively young, and seeing that other schools gained a lot of prestige and credibility through the idea of reincarnated teachers, they began to argue that each Dalai Lama was a reincarnation of the previous one. So Gendun Drup reincarnated into Gendon Gyatso, and Gendon Gyatso reincarnated into Sonam Gyatso. This was not something that they originally believed to be the case. They borrowed it from older schools of Buddhism. They believed in reincarnation in the context of the 10 realms, but not in the context of, this person in front of me is a reincarnation of somebody who died when or before this person was born. Also, at this stage in history, while Dalai Lama was one of the highest honorifics one could hold in Gelug Buddhism, he was not thought of as a reincarnation of Avalokiteshvara, or a theocratic leader with political power in addition to religious authority. The 4th Dalai Lama after Sonam Gyatso was Alten Khan's grandson, or great-grandson, depending on the lineage you use, and he was named Yonten Gyatso. He was not a very popular Dalai Lama, nor was he very comfortable in the position. He didn't really want to be Dalai Lama, and he struggled with being a monk and wielding the levers of power in the Gelug school. He was the first Dalai Lama who was selected and trained up from very early childhood, and because of his relation to Alten Khan, there was likely a great deal of suspicion that Alten Khan put pressure on the Gelug school to install Yonten to secure influence over it. Yonten died in 1617 at age 27 under suspicious circumstances, possibly from poisoning. While he was overall an unpopular Dalai Lama, he was the first for whom the tradition of raising up a Dalai Lama from very early childhood was established. He was followed by the 5th and perhaps most historically significant Dalai Lama, Nyawang Lobsang Gyatso. He was born named Kunga Migyur in 1617 to an elite noble family in Tibet with strong ties to 2 lineages of the Kagyu Buddhist school. His family's story is super fascinating in terms of the politics and history of rulership over Tibet. We will get into it someday, but not today. For now, note that the king at the time, Karma Punsuk Namgyal, had poor relations with the Gelug school. They were thought to be overly ambitious, and they were thought even to have poisoned the 4th Dalai Lama in an attempt to seize power back from the Mongol Khans. The king thus banned them from searching for a new Dalai Lama after the death of the 4th one, but they didn't listen, and they searched in secret. Kunga Migyur was recognized as the 5th Dalai Lama through a series of divination rituals, and was then ordained and given the name Nyawang Lobsang Gyatso. Through political connections and relationships, the 5th Dalai Lama became the ruler of Tibet in addition to being the Dalai Lama, cementing the position as one of political and religious leadership. The 5th Dalai Lama's teacher, Lobsang Chokyi Gyaltsen, was given the famous title of Panchen Lama, which is the 2nd highest rank in the Gelug school and serves as a spiritual advisor and teacher to the Dalai Lama. It is during the 5th Dalai Lama's reign that we get the idea of the Dalai Lama being an emanation or a reincarnation of Avalokiteshvara, and the Panchen Lama as being an emanation of Amitabha. I'll leave the chronological histories of the Dalai Lamas there for now, but we will come back around to a full episode of the 5th and 6th Dalai Lamas, who are very, very interesting figures. Before we move on, I would like to mention that the procedure for choosing Dalai Lamas has changed significantly over time. Dreams of monastics have always played a significant role, but that's the only through line for the most part. In these dreams, a monk will meet with a deceased teacher or with a bodhisattva who will give them some info about who the next Dalai Lama is or where to find him. Visions appearing on the surface of a sacred lake near Chokhar Gyal in central Tibet have also been very important. These dreams, visions, and some divination rituals, which were borrowed from Bon, the indigenous religion of Tibet, usually produce a short list of candidates. These candidates will be collected and tested on their ability to differentiate from items belonging to the earlier Dalai Lamas when they are placed alongside similar items, and then these will be confirmed with the dreams and visions.
What is the meaning and significance of the Dalai Lama?
It is important to note right at the beginning that I'm not a Tibetan, and I'm not a Tibetan Buddhist. Therefore, understand that I'm unable to really speak to the real-life experience of a Tibetan Buddhist and their personal understanding of the Dalai Lama. I'm an outsider looking in, and I will undoubtedly either miss a lot or get some stuff wrong here. From our discussion of the 5th Dalai Lama, it is clear that the position is understood as a political and religious leader for people who share an ethnic and religious identity. A parallel in European history would be the King or Queen of England after Henry VIII. After the formation of the Church of England, the monarch was a leader of an ethno-state as well as a leader of a religion. There are geographical, religious, ethnic, and cultural identities related to being English, and the English monarch is the progenitor and the highest level leader of all of those identities. Another similar example would be the Emperor of Japan or the King of Thailand. As such, the Dalai Lama has a triple responsibility of handling political affairs related to being the king of the Tibetan people and the land of Tibet, handling religious affairs related to being the highest level leader of the Gelug school of Buddhism, and handling cultural affairs related to Tibetan identity, tradition, and history. The Dalai Lama's role as a political and cultural leader of the Tibetan people and land has repeatedly been challenged and downplayed throughout history. Rulership of Tibet has been seized by the Mongols and Chinese several times throughout history, and since the Chinese annexation of Tibet in the 1950s, much of our understanding of the role of the Dalai Lama has been filtered through a Chinese lens. For example, most Westerners don't know that the Dalai Lama is also like a king of the Tibetans because the Chinese people want to exert their own political authority and control over Tibet. The current Dalai Lama has been removed from Tibet, has been forced to have relations with Chinese authorities over rulership of the Tibetan people, and thus has come to be understood in our current time as primarily a religious leader. But in history, obviously he's so much more than that. In the West, I've said that the Dalai Lama serves as a face, if not the face, of Buddhism. For better or worse, due to the efforts of the current Dalai Lama, most Westerners immediately think of him when they think of Buddhism. Though he's only a leader of Tibetans and Tibetan Buddhism, he's very well known and respected among all other Buddhist schools in the world. While the Zen sect in Japan or the Theravada sect in Thailand may not hold him as their sectarian or religious authority figure, they quite respect his work and what he says, and they offer him the highest deference and honor when he visits. I think this is quite appropriate and well-deserved. The Dalai Lama may not be the highest authority in all of Buddhism, but he's a significant figure, and he deserves to be treated as such.
Who is the Dalai Lama today?
The current Dalai Lama is the 14th one, and his full Dharma name is Jetsun Jamphel Nyawang Lobsang Yeshe Tenzin Gyatso, often shortened to Tenzin Gyatso. He was born Lamo Dhondup in Taxter, a village in what is historically Amdo, the northeast of Tibet. Today, this area is the Qinghai province of central China. Tenzin Gyatso's older brother, Thubten Gyatso, was the 13th Dalai Lama, and he died the year that Tenzin Gyatso was born. He reigned as a child Dalai Lama during and throughout the events we described in the Buddhist episode 10 on the selection of the next Dalai Lama, which will be linked in the show notes. In brief, he reigned as the Dalai Lama during the Chinese annexation of Tibet and the Tibetan exile government in India in the 1950s. He has been a very transformative force with regards to Buddhism in general and Tibetan Buddhism in particular. We cannot understate his role in modernizing and spreading Buddhism all over the world, and to the West in particular. He was and continues to be many Western people's entry point into the world of Buddhism. I had the pleasure of seeing him speak at Radio City Music Hall in New York City in 2012, and he was an incredible presence with many wonderful and interesting things to say. He has very wisely appealed to the West with regard to Tibetan sovereignty and independence from China. By being an incredibly charismatic leader, he's won over millions of Westerners to the side of Tibetan independence, while at the same time getting them interested in Buddhist doctrine and history.
By the way, free Tibet.
Yes, free Tibet. He has also been a significant force in modernizing and scientizing Buddhism, often making remarks in his writings and in his speeches, encouraging scientific experimentation on Buddhist claims, and reframing Buddhist doctrines in a more modern, rational, and materialistic light. On the show, I have been critical of his efforts to modernize and scientize Buddhism and Buddhist doctrine, but in context, I don't think he can be blamed for doing this. He's a political and religious leader of an exiled and/or conquered people, and he sees a world concerned with materialism, consumerism, and modernity. Just as he had to find a place for him and his people in this sort of world, he also has to find, or perhaps even create, a place in this world for Tibetan Buddhism. I would be remiss, however, not to mention some of the less positive aspects of his public life. He has been involved in several controversies, such as the Suck My Tongue incident, and some sexist comments about the potential of a female Dalai Lama, and some others. We'll not speak in detail about these incidents here, but listeners are encouraged to look them up to get a full picture of the Dalai Lama and his public role in the 20th and 21st century. He is an interesting person because he was born into a religious dynasty which already boasted a Dalai Lama and several other highly ranking lamas, and so he was deprived of a normal childhood when he was placed in the role of the 14th Dalai Lama. In that role, he also lived through the invasion and conquest of Tibet. He started as the occupant of an antiquated and sacred political and religious position, and continued on into the modern age, the age of the internet, technology, science, and modernity. He was born before World War II, and now he has an iPhone and several social media accounts that he and his staff manage. To me, that's incredible, and it makes him a fascinating figure to study and think about.
I'd also like to point out something I see in him that I wish was in other aging leaders of the world. He seems to have kept the capacity to learn and adapt to the world around him, while most other leaders of his age are digging in their heels trying to keep things the way they were when they were young, and that sucks.
Indeed. He's been very flexible and very light-hearted with regards to the world around him. He seems to understand how to make the best use of his role in the public eye, indicating to me that he's well advised by the Panchen Lama and others around him, and that he's at least a fairly smart guy. He isn't a populist with a Twitter addiction spitting out tweets every 4 minutes, but he also isn't a seat warmer in the role like many popes in history have been. He isn't alienating any allies to the Tibetan cause by being overtly political and partisan, but he isn't doing anything actively harmful to Tibetans on a daily basis either.
We hope you enjoyed this week's discussion of the Dalai Lama. Join us next week, where we will be discussing Buddhism and martial arts. What is the relationship between Buddhism and martial arts? What are some Buddhist-influenced martial arts and their histories? How does the practice of martial arts reconcile with the moral precept of not harming sentient beings?
We hope to see you there. Thank you for listening.
And we hope you enjoyed. There was originally going to be a joke here. Modern Buddhism has a remarkable record of mentioning real-life figures or events on a recording, only for said subject to show up in the news in a negative light between recording the episode and posting it. Usually it's something that's dumb or aggravating. The suck my tongue comment from the current Dalai Lama happened literally the day after we posted our original Dalai Lama episode. Unfortunately, it has happened again, and this time it's a tragedy, not a joking matter at all. Between recording this episode and editing it, a 6.8 magnitude earthquake hit in Tibet. As of this writing, more than 120 people are confirmed dead, and thousands of people have been displaced. Unfortunately, China is in control of Tibet right now, and my initial research indicates the Chinese government may not handle donations sent for disaster relief appropriately. Politics there makes it difficult to find places to send donations to help the affected, and I don't know the situation there well enough to navigate it confidently. Based on what I found online, it looks like the Amity Foundation is the place most likely to do good there. I am not confident in that suggestion, but it's the best I can do. Listeners, if you have a better idea or better knowledge of the situation in Tibet, please let us know. If you can, donate, and through all the tragedies happening right now, do what good you can.
Now, I would like to say a prayer for the people in Tibet who have been affected by the earthquake. First, I'll be chanting the Mantra of Light in its original Sanskrit. Om Amoga Vairochana Mahamudra Mani Padma Jvala Pravartaya Hum. Om Amoga Vairochana Mahamudra Mani Padma Jvala Pravartaya Hum. Om Amoga Vairochana Mahamudra Mani Padma Jvala Pravartaya Hum. Om Amoga Vairochana Mahamudra Mani Padma Jvala Pravartaya Hum. Om Amoga Vairochana Mahamudra Mani Padma Jvala Pravartaya Hum. Om Amoga Vairochana Mahamudra Mani Padma Jvala Pravartaya Hum. Om Amoga Vairochana Mahamudra Mani Padma Jvala Pravartaya Hum. Next, I'll be chanting the mantra of Avalokiteshvara, the patron bodhisattva of the Tibetan people. Om Mani Padme Hum. 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 May everybody in Tibet affected by the earthquakes find safety, relief, and peace in this difficult time.